Hey everybody, it's Kyle here, real estate editor at Sundae with Polina, the chief economist here at Sundae as well. Today we're here to talk about a variety of topics such as inflation, employment, and even the housing market as a whole. We're trying to figure out what's going to go on with housing prices. This is the biggest question on people's minds. Are housing prices going to fall? So we've seen days on market increase, we've seen inventory build up. There's a lot of doom and gloom in the headline, especially surrounding inflation, which is up to over 9% the last time I checked. And unemployment numbers were at their highest point this year last week. So we're trying to figure out what can we make out of all of this. Polina, what do you have to say about these different topics? Where do you want to start?
I think we should start with inflation. And let's just do this one thing at a time.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so can you start by defining inflation and then thinking about like the factors that go into it?
Sure. At some point I unpacked this for my then 8-year-old, who's 10 now. And basically it's when you can buy fewer goods or services today than you could buy yesterday with the same amount of money. He of course was mostly concerned about his allowance, but the way I explained this to him is, and the simplest example is a light bulb from IKEA, right? If you can buy an IKEA light bulb for $1 today, and a month later you can buy it for $2, and another month later you can buy it for $4. In December you'll pay $1,000 for an IKEA light bulb that cost you $1 in January. And this is a very egregious example of inflation, the most egregious one we've seen in Brazil, when people rushed to buy everything when the stores just opened, and we don't see that, thankfully, in the United States, but 9% increase in inflation means that prices are 9% higher today than they were a year ago. And of course, you want to break that down because a lot goes into that consumer price index. You have food, and even food is broken down into food at home and food away from home. You have energy, you have apparel, you have cars, you have even alcohol and tobacco, shelter, and medical care and transportation. So there are a lot of components. Of course, energy went up 60% from a year ago. That's our biggest factor. And the cars are still going up, and of course food, because the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, definitely impacted the food prices, as well as energy prices, of course.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
They're also connected.
Yeah, so I think that that's where a lot of the doom and gloom headlines are surrounding, like, affordability, especially, when you look at the cost of goods last year, like gas prices, right, last year versus this year at the same time, things like that. But even with that, Polina, there is such a thing as a healthy amount of inflation, right? We don't want that number 9 to turn to 0. We just want it less than 9, correct?
Sure. We definitely want less than 9. We wanted at about, I think Fed is targeting about 2%. And there was actually a concern that the inflation was too low before. And you don't want the inflation to be too low. You don't want deflation, because then people are waiting for the prices to drop before they buy something. And we want people to consume. Consumption is 70% of our GDP. So we don't want the inflation to be too low either.
Definitely. So we know that the Fed has been trying to combat inflation with interest rate hikes. Are these policies even effective against inflation? What are we seeing right now?
Oof, this is a good question. There are a lot of opinions on this. And in theory, the way interest rate hikes are supposed to work is when interest rates go up, borrowing becomes more expensive. So people should spend less, right? Because think about credit cards, for example. If your APR is going up, you will spend less. In practice, inflation we have right now is a little misunderstood. Plus, people, they get into the habit of spending. It takes them a little bit of time to adjust. So the inflation we have now is being blamed on everything from, COVID policies to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And, as I mentioned before, we have different components. And Fed can dictate prices and Fed can't produce goods. And one of the reasons for inflation is because we did have a lot of new money pumped into the economy, and we did have a lot of that money chased to few goods. So that's definitely a factor. And of course, interest rate hikes, they first and foremost, they impact the housing market. So what we've seen is that the housing price appreciation definitely slowed down since the interest rate hikes started. That said, housing is a very big chunk of consumer price index. Every component has its own weight, and housing is at least a third, I believe. I have the exact weight somewhere, but housing is at least a third. So by increasing interest rates, that makes housing more expensive, and subsequently it will increase rents, because people who can no longer afford to buy, they will be looking for rentals. So rental demand will increase, so rents will increase. So by trying to lower inflation for all other components, housing share of inflation will actually, or price appreciation should actually go up. So it's we're in a very interesting situation where I think that the Fed is just trying to slow down demand overall. But it's not a very straightforward answer. They are cooling the economy, so I hope it will work without sending us into a full-on recession. But whether soft landing is possible, we're yet to see. There are definitely a lot of components that are impacting our economy besides what's going on internally.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of other components, even within our own economy, jobs and unemployment claims, right? We had more last week than we had the any week prior this year. So I'd love to hear more about like how unemployment rates might impact housing and how this all ties back into inflation as well.
Sure. Well, the unemployment claims we are seeing so far, I believe it is from the layoffs that we've seen earlier, and primarily layoffs from, as we discussed before, from the company that kind of overhired to solve for COVID-induced shortages. We talked about Peloton, we talked about distribution when people had demand for goods while they were staying at home. They wanted more delivery services, more grocery deliveries, more streaming services. And once they could get out or once they could venture out, they no longer needed as much. And these companies kind of assumed that they would be growing at the same pace. So they had to do layoffs, and there is a general slowdown. Beyond that, what impacts housing, especially the housing market or homeownership or homeowners market, the jobs that impact the homeowners market, they're not as affected by recessions and downturns in general. So when you look at the job openings and when you look at the number of quits, those numbers are still fairly strong, especially the number of quits. Usually people quit their job when they know that they can find a job, or they found another job that pays more, right? When they're comfortable, when they're confident. And I believe that number was at 6 million last time I checked. So that's a very high number. So that number is still strong, even though we have seen an increase in unemployment claims. We are still, if you look at Google searches, we are still seeing fewer unemployment benefits than recession searches, which is unusual if you compare it to 2006, 2007. So I believe that both of these indicators mean that Fed will do another hike when you have inflation that's strong, and the labor market, even though it doesn't look as strong as it did a month ago, or it does show some signs of softening. Again, if you compare it to historic levels. Before the pandemic, we had the number of job openings was at 7 million, for example. The number still appears high. So I would guess that the Fed will hike at least 75 basis points, if not 100.
Absolutely. And do you think that there is a limit to this, Polina, where they're like, okay, rates are at that perfect point if they see things such as the percentage of inflation decrease? Is that kind of an indicator that they should continue to bump up interest rates, or is that a sign that they kind of just stop and reevaluate to kind of see the long-term effects at that point?
I don't know if it's going to be inflation. I think it's going to be other signs of weakness within our own economy. If they see unemployment number tick up, and because it's a complicated measure, it has to be more than just the unemployment number. They need to see labor participation stay low, as well as the number of unemployment claims go up. Because right now, if you compare the labor participation rate to the pre-COVID rate, it's still lower. There is a lot that goes into this. We haven't seen everybody come back to work yet. We don't know if they will. So basically, I think the Fed will need to see consumption going down. They will need to see retail numbers going down, retail sales going down, earnings going down. I mean, in general, right now, the markets are signaling that the economy is just not strong enough. And you can see that because the Fed is hiking up rates, but the 10-year yields are not holding up. They're getting to that 3% and they're falling back down. That shows you that the market players are not bullish on the economy.
Okay.
So they do anticipate the reports to start coming in weaker.
Okay. With all of that being said, I know that like real estate tends to be like the slower moving of all of these other indicators that we've talked about, right? So how is housing going to be impacted by the factors we just talked about?
I think it's going very much to depend on how deep the spillover from the interest rate hikes is going to be, and how well the companies will be able to withstand this pressure. So far, it looks like we're going to be okay. We're in a very different territory right now than we were in 2006, 2007. Prior to 2006, in 2005, you could see that there were a lot more bankruptcies, not even foreclosures. People were in a very different financial situation. Right now, looking at kind of the credit profile of the public. You don't see bankruptcy, as many bankruptcies, and you don't see any foreclosures. The pool of mortgages, the underlying mortgages we have is very strong. People are locked in at a very low mortgage rate. Majority of mortgages are locked in at a very low mortgage rate. People still have their jobs. And one thing you have to remember is even through the recession, most people are working. So first thing you need to remember is that before we see price declines, we do need to get inventory levels back up to the pre-pandemic levels. Number two, so we do need to see at least 3 to 4 months of supply, which we don't see yet. We do need to see some kind of an income impact. So we do need to start seeing job losses. So we need to see inventory buildup. We need to see job losses. What you might have seen in the news that month over month prices are going down. I don't think those prices were adjusted for seasonality. It's very much normal that at the end of May, sometimes June, depending on geography, you will see prices taper a little bit because of this phenomenon called spring selling season. A lot of people want to go into escrow in the spring. It's tied to the school year being over. People want to make sure they have a house secured in time or before the new school year. And so that's when you see the prices peak, and they tend to taper through the rest of the year. And it's been true for many years. So people who are not kind of industry veterans, if they just look at that month over month without adjusting for seasonality, they might mistake that for prices falling.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Polina, and especially in this short term where if we rewind back to 2020, right, the country was more or less shut down in March. So it kind of extended what would have been that spring market into the summer and in subsequent months, whereas that typically is not the case in a normal cycle.
For sure. I mean, I wouldn't even count 2020 as an indicator for anything. We should just throw it out from any kind of calculations. People were, buying houses unseen. People were stuck at home and getting tired of looking at the same old thing. I think not necessarily making rational decisions, suffering from cabin fever. I think we will be studying this period for many years to come, for sure. Definitely related to many choices, not just housing choices.
Definitely. So given everything that you just said, and in factoring in seasonality, do you anticipate the adjusted prices to fall?
In short, no, not right now, at least, not in the near future. And I have a long list of reasons why I don't think prices will fall. Of course, there is a possibility, let's hope it won't happen, that we might have another exogenous shock that can impact our economy. If that happens, all bets are off. But I don't believe that we will, because that assumes that people will start selling their homes en masse, and they have to live somewhere. Today, a lot of the people who locked in their 3% mortgage rate actually are paying less on monthly basis than if they were to rent an apartment. So that would not be a rational choice. But I have a long list of other reasons.
Yeah, for sure. Before we get into at least one of those reasons, What are some examples of like exogenous shocks that you were referring to? Like, I'm assuming like COVID, the war in Ukraine, like these things that are kind of outliers or out of the ordinary, unexpected events.
Yes. Oh, so similar to that, definitely we can have a natural disaster. If one of the insurance companies goes out of business, if for whatever reason we need to print more money, if another war starts closer to home, that might impact us differently. Anything that's related to our basic needs and wants, right? You think about food, you think about shelter. So these two things, we already know that we will have food shortages. While it might not impact us as much as it will impact some third world countries, it will, like the gas prices will impact us, right? And they will impact us disproportionately depending on the socioeconomic level. If you think about people who hold blue collar jobs, they are a lot more sensitive to fuel prices, right? Because they need to drive to work. Chances are they have bigger cars, especially if they're in construction jobs, especially, if they need to drive far. All of that can lead to social unrest. We do have elections coming up. These aren't exogenous shocks, they are and they aren't, right? Because with social media, they do expose us to other external risks. So anything from natural disasters to other wars and geopolitical risks are pretty big right now, as the rest of the world is experiencing fuel shortages and potentially food shortages. Again, it's, if you remember the Maslow pyramid of needs, you need to be fed and you need to be sheltered before you can think like a human being and care about other needs and be a good person. So definitely something to keep in mind.
For sure. And so going back to the point about the fact that we probably, aside from some of these big shock events, it's likely that prices will level off, but they won't fall at worst case scenario in the current conditions unless something crazy happens. But on the flip side of things, like the thing we do have going for us is that there's just a limited supply of houses and we're not building them fast enough to meet the demand of different factors. So I'd love for you to talk about like one thing in particular is, the demographics that might be fueling future real estate purchases.
Sure. I don't know if I necessarily say that we have that going for us or we have that going against us. I mean, that definitely we have that going for us if we want the prices to stay up. I think the prices will hold because we've been underbuilding for the last 10 years. And we have two different forces right now. One is we do have millennials who are turning 32, 33. The largest cohort of them in the next couple of years who do want to buy a house, who want to start a family. They've been forming households more actually since COVID hit. And at the same time, we don't have the silver tsunami coming where people are retiring and supposedly moving out of their 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom homes. To free them up for the next generation. Moreover, I actually believe that COVID probably, because of the COVID policies we had in the beginning, where we isolated people at risk, and they had to, or they were passing away alone. I think, if anything, people will have stigma attached to these these places, to assisted living facilities and these communities, because even prior to that, we knew that they primarily preferred to age at home. Now, probably more than that. You do see more builders building kind of houses, multi-generational homes that have either an ADU or that look more like duplexes. So I do think that we might see a long-term trend towards that, but in the immediate future, it won't be that easy to build more homes. We're not there yet. We haven't been innovating. So we have two very strong forces where we've been underbuilding. Right now, we have prices going up and rents going up at the same time. So we have just demand for housing overall. Doesn't matter if it's a rental or a single family home. As prices increase, people are being priced out. But I also believe that it's such a big issue for people that with elections coming up, there will be a long list of solutions proposed on how to make housing more affordable.
Absolutely. And I know, like, just speaking from the millennial perspective myself, is like, I think, generally speaking, a lot of these millennials have remote jobs. And one of the solutions that they've kind of found to get around this affordability issue with housing is either moving further out from the cities that they're already living in or relocating. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about that trend. And I know that's a topic we could probably talk about at length on another day too, but maybe if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Oh, this is a very good topic. And I have to say, I haven't faced all of my biases, my personal biases related to this topic. I believe in hybrid work. I don't believe in 100% remote work, or at least not for everybody. It's, even though I've managed remote teams before, and I have to say that it's very hard to be 100% remote, and it's not for all personality types. So I think that we have to wait until the dust settles completely to see how that works, because there are so many things at play that I'm seeing, or that I have seen over the last couple of years. Some of these more remote towns, they don't have the infrastructure to handle the influx of people that moved there. So I also don't think that we know exactly how many people will move back, how many people moved there to escape the cities during the pandemic, and whether they moved back when they could enjoy the culture again. I don't think that we've seen that measured yet. I know there is migration happening. One of the things I would love to work on is whether people are buying primary homes, or they are just buying a home to put their money into real estate, and they're not giving up their apartments or the properties they're living in, because this data lags. And you can see some of the studies from Hire Helper. You can also see some of the studies from USPS. And I haven't seen enough forwarding mail data to indicate that the migration trends are as huge as what some of the, like the United Van Lines and the U-Haul studies are showing. So I don't know how permanent this is, in short.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as more and more information comes out, we'll be able to give a more in-depth answer on this. I know we have a ton more to talk about, Polina, but I think we're probably going to do some other episodes in the future because we have a lot of great stuff to go over. Is there anything you'd like to add before we head out for today? Any last touch points?
I think that there's a lot of information out there right now. And I like to think of myself as anti-hysteria. And Kyle will tell you that my code name is Debunker. So I always try to look for the truth and information. And I would advise everybody to do the same. And if you have any questions, you can always email me, Polina, Polina, at Sundae with an E. And I'll answer any questions for you, because I strongly believe in real assets, especially right now when the dollar is strong. Everything out there is pretty volatile. and we can't hold our money in cash because of inflation. And real estate makes a lot of sense. So that said, feel free to reach out and I'll answer your questions.
All right, I love it. Maybe I'll introduce you as the debunker next time and skip your first and last name, go straight to that, and we'll just know you as that from now on. But thanks so much, Polina. It's been great chatting, and tune in for next time.